Some cruelties do not come at you with a raised hand. They arrive dressed as something splendid, so the whole world stands admiring while the blade does its quiet work. When the crowd pressed close to praise the Duke of Wolvern's magnificent grey, they saw the finest horse in the West Country. A ruined saddler's daughter saw the girth cut clean above the buckle, a killing folded into an accident. She meant to speak, certain she would be dragged off and laughed at. Instead, the hardest man in the county came down off the horse. The fair at Harricombe spread across the water meadow, below the church, every Michaelmas, and it drew every horse worth the name from 3 counties and half the more besides. Cider went warm in the sun, a fiddler sawed near the ale tent, and the whole bright roaring press of a country come to trade filled the long field. Loveday Trewin had come for none of it. She had come to sell a saddle. It lay across her arms now, wrapped in sacking heavier than its weight. Her father had built it over the better part of a winter, back when men still spoke the name Trewin with respect. The tree was seasoned beech, the flaps cut from a single hide, so the grain ran true, the stitching so fine that a jealous rival had once accused him of using a machine. He had used nothing but an all-waxed thread, and 40 years of his 2 hands. It was the last thing of his worth, a shilling, and she had a shilling and 4pence to her name, and a place waiting as companion to an elderly widow in Taunton, if only she could pay the carrier to take her there. She was 25, and she had learned long ago to keep her face smooth as good leather, while her thoughts ran otherwise beneath. It was the only inheritance her father's disgrace had left her. That stillness. A Trewin did not weep in public. A Trewin did not flinch when the name was spoken like a curse. She pressed her thumbnail into the hard pad of callus, where the awl had sat since she was 9, and went looking for a dealer who would give an honest price, and not ask her surname. She never reached one. The crowd near the top of the meadow had thickened into a wall, and a sound went through it that she knew at once, that low, wondering murmur people make in the presence of something rare. She had no business at the gentry's end, where blood horses changed hands for more than her father had earned in a decade, but the press carried her, and between one shoulder and the next she saw what they had all come to see. He was a grey, and she granted him without wanting to, magnificent, 16 hands and more, dappled like weather over water, with a proud small head and a black eye that took in the whole shouting fair and found it beneath him. And on his back, sitting the great animal as though the two had been carved from one block of stone, was a man in a dark coat whom the crowd would not stop naming. Wolverney. The Duke himself. Wolvern, who had not been seen at a fair or a hunt or a dinner in as long as most could remember. Wolver, who had shut the great gates of his house the year his brother died and had been turning the world away ever since. Loveday did not care about dukes. She had learned what the great houses were worth when one of them broke her father across its knee and walked on whistling. She would have looked her fill at the horse and gone back to her selling, and her whole life would have stayed a smaller, safer thing. But she was a saddler's daughter, and her eye went where a saddler's eye always goes, not to the animal, but to the work upon it, to the tooled bridle, to the new stirrup leathers, to the girth and the strap that ran up beneath the saddle flap to the buckle that held the man on the horse. And there, an inch above the buckle, where no honest use in the world puts wear, the strap was cut, not worn, not split with age, cut halfway through and clean, the way a sharp knife parts leather in a single draw, then rubbed over with grease and dirt to hide the pale wound of it. It would hold at a walk. It would hold while he sat being admired. It would part the instant the horse was asked to do anything at all, and spill a grown man head first beneath a ton of frightened animal, and every soul in the meadow would swear on the book they had watched a tragic accident. She knew, because she had seen a strap cut in that exact place, in that exact way, once before in her life. It had killed a man, and it had killed her father to be blamed for it. 10 years fell away between one breath and the next. She had been 15 the day they came for her father, and she remembered it, the way you remember a burn. A gentleman had died out with the hounds that autumn. His girth gave it a wall, they said, and he went down under his own hunter and broke his neck in the wet grass, and the strap that failed had come from the shop of Ambrose Trowan, saddler of Ottersley, under the moor. Her father had made that girth. He never denied it. What he denied, quietly and then loudly and at last uselessly, was that his work had failed. Leather did not part like that of its own accord, he said. He had dressed and stitched that strap himself, and it had been sound. Someone had put a blade to it. He said it to the coroner, to the dead man's family, to any who would hear. And the answer was always the same. A grieving house wanted someone to blame, and a tradesman was cheaper to blame than an act of God. Careless, shoddy, a cutter of corners who had sent a good man to his grave to save an hour's honest work. It was a lie, and it did not matter that it was a lie. The custom left within the month, the bank called in his debts, and they sold the shop and the tools and the seasoned wood he had bought against his old age. Her father, the straightest man she ever knew, took to sitting by a dead fire with his ruined hands open in his lap, and was gone inside 2 years of nothing the doctor could name but a broken heart. And through all of it, one thing had lodged in Loveday like a splinter too deep to dig out. Her father, half mad with the injustice, had made her look at the failed girth, made her learn it, made her swear to remember what an honest break looked like against a false one. Wear frays, age cracks, rot lets go a fiber at a time. But that strap had shown a clean, bright line where a knife had drawn across it, then the ragged tear where the rest gave under the man's weight. She had been 15, and she had known, with a child's terrible clarity, that her father told the truth, and that no one on earth would believe a saddler's girl who said so. She had carried it 10 years. She had told herself the man who did it was long gone, or dead, or beyond her reach. She had told herself it was over. Now she stood in the roar of the fair with her dead father's saddle in her arms, looking at the very same cut, an inch above the very same buckle, on a horse that carried the brother of the house that had ruined her. For she knew now whose death had begun it. The gentleman who died beneath his hunter that autumn had been Roland, Duke of Wolverne. And the hard-shut man on the grey above her, whom a cut strap was about to send the same way, was Roland's younger brother, who had buried a duke and become one, and had not ridden willingly to any gathering since. Someone had killed the first brother, and dressed it as her father's carelessness, and someone was about to kill the second, here, before a laughing crowd, and let it be called ill luck. To speak now was to do the very thing that had destroyed her family. To stand up as a nobody and cry murder at the gentry in the open air. They would call it a truant spite over an old shame. At best they would laugh her out of the meadow. At worst there was a constable among the tents, and a spinster who cried murder at a duke's household could find far darker trouble than laughter. She had 1 shilling and 4pence, and a soft old widow in Taunton, and one clear road out of the county that had eaten her family whole. All she had to do was keep her mouth shut and let a stranger die. She looked up at the closed, hard face of the man on the horse, and at the crowd leaning in to watch him ride. Then Loveday Trowan, who had sworn 10 years past never again to hold her tongue if it came to this, stepped off the safe road and into the crowd. Getting to him was another matter. The gentry's end of the fair had its own soft wall of keepers and grooms, men whose whole art was to stand between their betters and the press of ordinary people, and one of them saw her coming the way a good dog sees a stranger at the gate. He was a broad, sandy man of middle years, in a coat too fine for a servant, with a horseman's bowed legs, and small pale eyes that went over her worn dress and her sacking bundle and priced her exactly. Wolverne's own horsemaster. She would learn his name soon enough, Vosper. He stepped into her path before she had closed half the distance. "Off with you," he said, not loudly, the way a man speaks who is used to being obeyed by anything smaller than a horse. "There's not for your sword up here. Selling's down the meadow. I need a word with the Duke." Her voice came steadier than she had any right to expect. "One word. It will not take a minute of his time." Something moved behind the pale eyes, quick and unfriendly. "The Duke does not give words to peddlers. Down you go. Then I will say it to you, and you may carry it to him." She lifted her chin toward the gray. "That girth has been cut. The strap above the buckle, the near side, cut halfway through with a knife and greased over to hide it. If he asks that horse for a canter, it will part, and it will kill him, and it will look for all the world like bad leather. Take the saddle off and look, and you will see I am right." For the space of a breath, the horse-master simply stared at her, and then a thing happened that she would turn over in her mind for a long time afterward. His florid face did not fill with the honest confusion of a man hearing something absurd. It went, for just an instant, still, careful, the face of a man who has heard not a madness, but a danger. Then he laughed, too loud, and the stillness was gone, as though it had never been. "Cut," he said, playing it now for the grooms drifting near. "Hark at her." And who'd cut his grace's girth at Harricum Fair in front of 500 people? Give over. That's honest wear, if it's anything. He leaned close enough that she caught the ale on him. "I know you, Trowan, aren't you? The bad saddler's brat from Ottersley, come to talk leather to your betters and drag your father's dirty name about the place." His voice dropped, all the false humor gone. "Get down the meadow, girl. Before I call the constable and have you taken up for a slanderer, I'd enjoy it." The word Trowan had gone through the nearest of the crowd, and she heard it repeated, heard the small, ugly laughter start, felt the old familiar cold of being the shamed thing in the middle of a staring ring. 10 years ago, it had bowed her head. Her father had stood in a coroner's court and been broken by exactly this. The laughter, the certainty of his betters. She did not bow her head. "Call him then," she said, and was surprised to find her voice ring clear across the hush. "Call the constable. Let him take me up here beside the horse, and then take the saddle off in front of him, and let us all see together whether the strap is whole or cut. If I am wrong, I will go to the pillory gladly, and you may throw the first stone yourself. But if I am right, Master Horsemaster, you will have to answer how you looked at that girth this morning and saw nothing. It was a small thing, it should have changed nothing. But an old man near the gray's head, a lifelong horseman by the look of his hands, turned his weathered face from her to the girth strap and back again, and a line came into his brow, and he did not laugh. And Vosper saw him not laugh. For the first time the horsemaster's certainty showed a hairline crack, and he took a step toward her that was no longer bluster, but something closer to fear, his hand coming up to take her by the arm and put her out of there before the old man could bend and look. He never touched her. Above them both, the gray shifted its weight, and its rider, who had sat like carved stone through all of it, turned his head at last. The whole meadow seemed to feel it and fall quiet by degrees. Loveday looked up and met the eyes of the Duke of Wolvern, pale and level and cold as slate under water, and saw them move from her face to the horsemaster's raised hand, to the sacking bundle in her arms, and settle at last on the one thing she had not expected any of them to understand. His own gloved left hand rested on his thigh, 2 of its fingers stiff and crooked, and never again to close. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the girth strap. For a breath, the whole meadow held still. And then the Duke of Wolverny came down off the horse. He did it without grace. He brought his right leg over and dropped, and she saw him take the landing hard, saw the ruined left hand close on the saddle only enough to steady him, and no more, as though he did not trust it to bear his weight. Then he was on his feet in the mud among them, taller than she had judged from below, and the crowd fell back from him the way water falls back from a thrown stone. He did not look at her. He walked to the gray's near side and laid his good hand on the girth. "Your Grace, Vosper, had gone the color of tallow. There is no need. The horse is sound. I dressed the tack myself this dawn. The girl is a known troublemaker. a saddler's brat with a grudge on the whole county. Let me have her put off the ground, and we will hear no more of it. Take the saddle off." The Duke had not raised his voice. It was a low voice, roughened, a voice that did not seem much used, and it went through the crowd and left silence behind it. Vosper did not move. For one instant longer he did not move, and Loveday watched the Duke mark it, watch those pale eyes flick to his horse-master and take careful note of a servant who would not obey a plain order, and file it away somewhere cold. "Myself, then," the Duke said, and reached for the buckle with his good hand. A groom sprang to it before he could, fumbling the girth loose, dragging the saddle up and off the gray's steaming back. And there, hanging from the billets, was the strap, and every soul close enough to see it went quiet. The old horseman who had not laughed stepped forward then, without being asked. He bent his gray head to the billet, touched the edge of the cut with one thick thumb, and looked up at the Duke, and gave a single slow nod. That nod did more than all her words had done. It was one lifelong horseman telling another that the woman was right, and the crowd felt it, and the murmur that ran through them had changed its note entirely. The Duke lifted the strap and looked at it a long moment. Then, without turning, he held it out behind him, out toward her. "You saw it from 30 feet in a crowd," he said. "Come and tell me I am wrong." She came. She took the strap. Her hands, that had trembled before Vosper, were perfectly steady now, for this was the one thing in the world she knew better than anyone living. She turned it to the light.
"One cut,"
she said, and pitched her voice to carry, for let them all hear it. Drawn from the flesh side, the back so the grain would hide the line until it opened. A single pull of a sharp blade, not a nick, not a saw, one clean draw by a hand that has done it before. Then greased and rubbed with dirt to kill the shine of new leather. She looked up at him. It was whole when the hide was tanned. It was whole when it was stitched. Somebody set a knife to it this morning after your man says he dressed it, and meant you to break your neck before noon and have the world call it an old strap gone at last. The silence had teeth in it now. Somewhere a woman said low that the Trowan girl had been right all along, and the words ran back through the crowd like a crack across ice. The Duke looked at her and she braced, for now came the part she knew. Now he would remember the name Vosper had thrown at her. Trowan, the saddler whose careless work had killed his brother. His face would shut against her, and she would be the enemy after all. "Trine," he said. "Yes, Ambrose, Trian's daughter, his only one." Something moved far back in the cold of his eyes, something she had no name for. He looked down at the cut strap in her hands, the twin of the one that had killed his brother and buried her father, and when he spoke again, his rough voice had dropped so low, it was almost for her alone. "I have waited 10 years, said the Duke of Wolvern, "to hear one honest soul stand in the open and say that word aloud, cut." He straightened to his full height. "You will not be going down the meadow, Miss Trowan. Not today, and I think not for a long while yet. Come away from all these eyes. You and I have a great deal to say to one another, and not one word of it is for a fair." He took her not to a tent, but to his own carriage. Drawn up on the high ground beyond the horse lines, a plain dark traveling coach with no crest upon the door. He handed her up himself, with the good hand. Vosper he left in the mud, with an order to a footman that the horse-master was not to leave the fair and was to be watched till his grace sent word. She saw Vosper's face as it was said, the face of a man watching a door swing shut. Inside the coach the Duke sat across from her, his ruined hand resting palm up on his knee, and studied her in the gray light with a directness that in a lesser man would have been rude, as though he had forgotten the ordinary manners of looking at people. "Tell me how you knew," he said. "Not how you saw it, how you knew to look." So she told him, of Ottersley and the shop and the 40 years of her father's 2 hands. Of the autumn, she was 15, the gentleman dead, at a wall. The girth that took the blame, the coroner, the custom draining away the dead fire the 2 years it took her father to die of it. Of the clean, bright line she had been made to look at and swear to remember, and how she had known at 15 that her father was in the right, and had known just as surely that the word of a saddler's girl would never be let to prove it. The Duke listened without once cutting across her, and when she had done he was quiet, a long moment, looking now not at her but at his own hand. "His name was Roland," he said. "My brother. He was the whole of my family." I was riding at his shoulder when his girth went at the Ashcot wall. He turned the ruined hand over. I caught the rein. I had it. And the leather tore through my fingers like wet paper and took 2 of them half away, and he went down under the horse, and I have spent 10 years being told by every soul I know that it was an old strap and a careless tradesman and God's own ill luck. He looked up at her. "I held that leather as it failed, Miss Trowan. I felt it go, and it did not go like old leather. It went like something already half parted. I have known for 10 years my brother was murdered and could never prove it, nor make one soul believe me, for the only witness was a grieving younger brother thought to want someone to blame." A muscle moved in his jaw. "And now I sit a new horse at a fair for the first time since I put him in the ground. And within the hour a saddler's daughter I have never met reads my girth across a crowd and says the one word I have carried alone." Outside, the noise of the fair went on, small and far away. "Someone tried to kill me today," the Duke said, "the same way they killed my brother. The hand that did the first is not gone, nor dead, nor beyond reach. It is close, close enough to dress my tack. You are the only soul living who can read that hand's work back to me, and the only one who wants its truth as fiercely as I do, for it is your father's grave as well as my brother's." She understood then what he offered, and it was not a coin and not a charity. It was a war, and a place in it. "I am bound for Taunton," she heard herself say, "to be read to sleep by a widow I have never met. You are bound for nowhere of the kind. Come to Wolverney Court, be my saddler, my only one, the single pair of hands I let near a buckle from this day on. I will pay you a wage to make your Taunton widow faint, a dry room, the run of my grandfather's library, and honest work that matters. And in the doing of it we will find the hand that cut this strap, and the hand that cut the other, and clear your father's name. In the same hour we see the man who ruined it, hanged." He paused. "I have not wanted a single thing in 10 years, Miss Trowan. I find that I want this. Say yes." She thought of the 1.4 shillings. She thought of the clean, bright line she had sworn to remember. She thought, God help her, of her father by his dead fire. "There is a knife somewhere in your household, your grace," Loveday said, "and the hand that holds it has drawn the same stroke twice in 10 years. That is not a hand that stops at 2. You are asking me to walk into the one house in England where that hand is at home." "I am." "Good," she said, and was as startled as he to hear it. "Then at least I will be where I can watch the leather." Wolvern Court stood at the head of a long neglected drive under the shoulder of the moor, and it was everything the valley whispered. Half its windows were shuttered from within. It was a house built to hold a great family, and it held one man and his silence, and wore the look of a place that had set itself to outlast its own grief by sheer stone stubbornness. Loveday was given a room that had not been aired in years, and was aired for her in an afternoon, and a workroom off the old harness court with a good north light, a bench, and a rack of tools finer than any her father had owned. The steward received her. His name was Pascoe, a spare gray man of 60, who had served the house since before either brother was born, and he looked at her that first evening with the flat eyes of a servant, deciding whether a newcomer was fool, schemer, or fresh grief to be managed. Then the Duke told him in her hearing that Miss Trewan's word upon any strap or buckle in the house was to be taken as his own, and no tack was to touch a horse of his until her hands had passed over it. She watched old Pascoe weigh her again on the spot, and something behind the gray face settled, and he bent his head to her by half an inch, which she would learn was, from Pasco, very nearly an embrace. The valley was less kind. Within 4 days, the story had run the length of the water and come back, changed in the telling. The recluse Duke had taken a woman into his shut-up house. Not a housekeeper, not a governess, but a young woman, unwed, of no family, a tradesman's daughter with a bad name already, called by the pretty title of Saddler, to cover what any woman with sense could see it truly was. They agreed over their tea that they had always known Wolverney would come to something unsavory, and that the Trowan girl had gone to the fair angling for exactly this, and landed it whole. Pasco brought her the flavor of it stiffly, judging that she ought to know. Loveday heard him out, and found to her own mild surprise that it did not bite as once it would have. "They ruined my father's name 10 years ago when I was a child, and it very near killed me," she told the steward. "But there is a strange freedom in a thing. Once it is fully done, Mr. Pasco, they cannot ruin me twice. A name already thrown in the gutter costs a woman nothing to spend." She drew a fresh length of waxed thread through her fingers and did not look up. "I did not come to Wolvern Court to be thought respectable. I came to read leather. Let them talk." The old man looked at her a moment longer than was needful, and went away, and had she glanced up she would have seen upon his face the plain beginnings of respect. The blow, when it fell, came out of the fair behind her. The footman set to watch. Vosper rode in on the 5th day to own he had failed. The horsemaster had begged leave to fetch his coat, slipped out the back of an ale tent, and had not come again. A horse was gone from the lines with him. Vosper was away clean, a full day before any man thought to give chase, and no soul in 3 parishes would own to knowing where. The Duke received it without a flicker, but that night, crossing the dark gallery to her room, Loveday found him at a tall black window, looking down the length of the drive, and he spoke without turning. "An innocent man does not run, Miss Trowan," he said. "Vosper has told us with his heels what he would never have let past his teeth. He cut the strap. But a horsemaster does not wake one morning and decide, alone, to murder a duke. He was paid, or he was ordered, which means the hand above his is still here, still close, still watching to see what a saddler's daughter and a broken recluse mean to do about it." He turned from the window, and the single candle threw the ruin of his hand into hard relief. "My cousin Carew comes to us on Friday," he said. "Out of deep concern, his letter tells me, for my recent brush with disaster. He is my heir. If I die in the night, every stone of this house is his by morning, and he has not once in 10 years crossed my drive, out of concern for anything under heaven." The not-quite smile touched his mouth and left it. "Sleep lightly while he is beneath this roof, and from tomorrow you will look at my saddle before I ride, and no man, cousin or king, will stand between your eyes and that leather." Denzil Carew arrived on Friday in a coach that did carry a crest upon the door, and rather too large a one. He came out of it in dove gray and dark green, a handsome man of 40, with a soft unlined face, and a smile that arrived a half-second before it was wanted. He took the Duke by the shoulders in the hall, murmured how dreadfully the county had been shaken by the business at the fair, how his dear cousin must not tax himself with morbid fancies when a strap was only a strap, and grief did strange things to a lonely mind. "You must let me take some of this weight from you," he said, warm as a poultice. "You were never made to carry it all alone. Rest, cousin. Let those who love you carry it a while." Loveday, watching from the stair, felt the shape of it at once. It was not concern. It was a man walking through a house he expected soon to own. She had braced for the blow to fall that first evening, for a gentleman heir would surely see the disreputable saddler put out of doors. But it did not come. The Duke's standing order held. Her place at the north bench went unquestioned, and she went to her room breathing carefully, like a woman crossing ice that had not yet cracked. "Before we go on, if Loveday and the Duke have taken hold of you, do stay with them. Follow the channel, so the next chapter comes to you the moment it is told. It was in the harness court next morning that Karu found her, alone. He came in all ease, stood too close while she worked, and asked, with that smile, to see the famous strap the clever saddler had read across a whole crowd. She did not think quickly enough, and he had it out of the tray and turning in his own 2 hands before she could reach for it, and she saw that he held it in his left. "Extraordinary," he murmured, running his thumb along the very line she had found, the way a man runs his thumb along something he already knows by heart. He looked up, and for one breath the soft face was not soft at all. "What a great deal you see, Miss Trewin. One wonders that so small a person should carry so dangerous a gift and be so very much alone in the world." Then the smile came back, and he set the strap down, and was gone. And Loveday stood in the good north light with her heart going hard, understanding that she had just let the man handle the one thing that could hang him, and that he had wanted her to know he was not afraid of it. The trouble with the gray was that the Duke could not ride him. Loveday had seen it within the week. The way you see a limp and a sound-looking horse if you watch it walk long enough. He rode, yes. He went out most mornings before the house was up and came back with the mud on him and something eased in his face. But he rode wrong. He held the reins in his right hand only and kept the ruined left curled against his thigh like a thing he was ashamed to bring into the light, and it made him stiff and half safe in the saddle, and it meant that if the gray ever truly took fright, one hand would never hold him. A man who had lost a brother to a horse and a strap was riding every morning one shy of the same grave. She thought about it for 3 days the way she thought about any problem of leather, which was to say constantly and from every side, and then she went to him. "Your hand," she said without preamble, in the study where he sat with his grandfather's books. "Show it to me." He went very still. "Why?" "Because I mean to build something for it, and I cannot build for a hand I have not measured." For a long moment she thought he would refuse. No one, she would later learn, had touched that hand in 10 years. He had hidden it under a glove and behind his thigh since the day the leather tore it half away, because to show it was to be pitied, and pity was the one thing the Duke of Wolvern could not bear. But she only stood there, plain and unmoved, holding out her own 2 hands, calloused and stained and without a scrap of softness in her face, and at last he drew off the glove and laid the ruin in her palms. It was bad. 2 fingers stiff and crooked, the tendons gone, a white seam of old scar dragging across the back where the strap had run through as it parted. She turned it to the window light and studied it, the way she studied everything, as a piece of work that had failed and might yet be helped. And she did not flinch, and she did not soften, and she did not tell him she was sorry. "You cannot close it," she said. "No." "Then we will not ask it to close." She pressed lightly at the base of the thumb, at the 2 sound fingers that remained. "These still hold, these still grip. The trouble is that a rein wants a whole fist, and you have not got one. So you have given the hand up for lost and tried to ride a great horse on half of what God left you. That is not courage, Your Grace. That is a slow way of arranging your own funeral." He gave a short, rough sound she realized, startled, was a laugh, the first she had ever won from him. She built it over 4 evenings at the North Bench, and he took, without either naming it, to sitting with her while she worked. A book he did not read open across the bench, watching her hands. Sometimes they talked, and more often they did not, and the silence was the easy kind she had not known since she was a girl at her father's elbow. She cut a cuff of soft doubled hide that closed about the wrist and the heel of the hand, and buckled snug so the leather held where the tendons could not. It she stitched a housing for the rein, set at the very angle she measured off his own good grip, so the rein answered to the turn of his wrist and the press of his 2 whole fingers, and asked nothing at all of the ruined ones. She worked it and unpicked it and worked it 3 times over. She dyed it plain and dark so no eye would catch it and no fool would ask. "You are very sure of it," he said one evening, watching the all go through. "I am sure of leather," she said. "It is the one thing in this life that has never once lied to me. It does what you make it do, and if it fails you, it is because a hand failed it first. I trust it further than I trust most people, and have found no cause yet to be sorry." When it was done, she did not carry it up to the study like a gift, because he would not have known where to put his face. She took it to the harness court at dawn, where he stood saddling the gray, one-handed in the cold, and said, "Give me your left hand and be quiet." She buckled it on him herself. She threaded the rein through its housing, closed his 2 good fingers over it, and stepped back. "Now ride," she said. "Ask him for a canter. The thing I could not give you at the fair. Take it now, and trust the leather, because I made it, and it will hold." He looked at her a moment in the gray light. Then he swung up, gathered the reins, both reins, in 2 hands for the first time in 10 years, and took the gray out across the frost-hard paddock, and asked him to go. Loveday stood at the rail and watched a dead man come back to life. The gray opened into a long, clean canter, and the Duke rode him the way he must have ridden before the world broke over him, low and easy and whole, the ruined hand doing its share at last. When he came round, his hard-shut face had cracked wide, and there was a thing in it she had never seen and had not thought the man could hold joy. Plain and boyish and astonished, he drew up before her, breathing hard, the gray blowing steam, and whatever he had meant to say he did not say. What he said instead, low, was, "My name is Tristram." She had never heard it. No one used it. He had been the Duke, or Wolvern, or Your Grace, for 10 years, and the man beneath the title had gone into the ground with his brother. "Tristram," she said, trying the shape of it in her mouth. "I should like," he said, "to hear it from one soul in the world who wants nothing of me but that the leather hold." He looked at the cuff on his hand, at her work, and then at her, and the look went on, a beat longer than a look between a duke and his saddler had any business doing. "I have not been able to do this since the morning. I could not hold my brother. You have given me back a thing I had buried for good, and I do not know how a man thanks anyone for that." "You do not," she said, though her throat had gone tight. "You keep the leather oiled and you come home alive, and that is thanks enough for any saddler." Neither of them moved. The frost smoked off the paddock. Something had changed its shape in the air between them, and they both felt it, and neither had a name for it yet, and it was as well, for across the court, at an upper window of the shut-up house, a soft-faced man in a dressing gown stood watching the crippled recluse ride whole again, and did not like at all what he saw. Winter closed its hand on the moor, and Wolvern Court, which had been a tomb with a man in it, began, without anyone deciding it, to be a house again. There was a shape to the days now. She looked at his saddle every morning, her hands passing over every buckle and billet, while the gray stamped in the cold, and only when she stepped back and said, "Sound," did he mount. He rode out whole on her leather. He came home and they took breakfast together, not as Duke and saddler but as 2 people who had run out of reasons to eat apart. And then he went to his grandfather's books, and she to her bench, and the fire cracked, and Pascoe carried in things they had not asked for, and bore away things they had not finished, and said nothing, and saw everything. She did not think of Taunton any more. She could not have said when she had stopped. They fell into an evening habit of the library, the 2 of them, and the fire. And it was there she learned the man under the 10 years of silence. He was dry, and he was clever, and when she caught him out in a careless figure or a piece of estate nonsense, he did not bark as he had barked that first day. He only grunted and pushed the paper across to her to be put right, which she came to understand was, from Tristram, a kind of tenderness. Once when she told him a thing about her father, about the winter he built the great saddle and would let no one else so much as oil it, the Duke was quiet a while and then said that he thought he would have liked Ambrose Trowen, and that he was sorry the world had not, and Loveday had to go and see to the fire so he would not watch her face. She thought, kneeling at the hearth with her back to him, that she had come to Wolver Court, braced against every kind of blow, and had somehow failed to brace against kindness, which she was discovering to be the one thing she had no armor for at all. It was on such an evening, with the wind off the moor trying the shutters, that she brought him the thing she had never shown a living soul. She unwrapped the oilcloth on his desk and laid it in the lamplight. A girth old, the leather gone dark and dry, with the years, the buckle green at the tongue. He looked at it, then at her, and did not understand, and she watched him. Not understand. And then she watched it reach him. "That is Roland's," he said. His voice had gone strange. "It is the girth that killed him, the one they hung my father's name upon. When they sold the shop and the tools and everything my father owned, this was in the coroner's leavings, and no one wanted a dead man's broken strap, so I took it. And I have carried it 10 years, because it was the only proof I had that I was not mad." She set the Faraday strap down beside it. "The one from the gray. Look." He bent over the two of them in the lamplight, the old and the new, 10 years apart, and even he, who was no saddler, could see at once she laid her finger to the line, the same clean draw from the flesh side, the same grease seam, the same single confident stroke of the same kind of blade, pulled the same way from the same side. "A left hand," Loveday said quietly. "Both of them. The draw runs the way a left hand pulls a knife toward the body. The man who cut your brother's girth and the man who cut your horses are one man, your grace, and he is right cheerful, and he takes his tea in your dining room, and he holds his cup in his left hand, for I have watched him do it." Tristram was silent a long while, looking at the two straps as though they were his brother's face. "I have hunted him 10 years, he said at last. "I never once had this." And he told her then what he had never told a soul. That he had not believed the coroner for 1 hour. That he had spent the whole decade of his ruin quietly buying back the truth, a scrap at a time. A patient lawyer in Exeter who had traced, year upon year, the money that ran under the Wolvern estate. Carew's debts, mountainous and hidden. The seasons Carew had kindly assisted a grieving young duke, too broken to check a figure, and the sums that had leaked sideways in those seasons into Carew's own sinking pockets. "Roland caught it," Tristram said, "the month he died. He wrote to me that he had found Denzil bleeding the estate, and meant to cast him out, and see him ruined for it. 11 days later his girth failed at the Ashcot wall. I have known the why of it since the day we buried him. I have never been able to prove the how. You have just laid the how on my desk. The net wanted only the hand that had held the knife, and the Exeter lawyer had set a Bow Street man on the road after Vosper a fortnight since. She defended him 3 days later, and had not planned to. It was at the church, at the foot of the valley, where she had gone with Pascoe on an errand of the house, and a knot of the valley's finest were murmuring at the lich gate, and one of them, a magistrate's wife with a carrying voice, said the word mad, and then the word cripple. And then something about the grief-rotted recluse and the tradesman's girl he kept to cut up harness and tell him fairy tales of murder. Loveday turned round. She did not raise her voice. She had learned young that a low voice cuts the deeper. She said that the grief-rotted recluse had buried the only family he owned and been lied to about it by his betters for 10 years, and had borne it with more grace than anyone at that gate would find for a wet Sunday. She said that she had seen his account of his brother proved true with her own eyes and her own hands, and that the valley might learn, sooner than it would care to, exactly who among its admired and its respectable had done a murder and let an honest man hang for it. She said she would take the friendship of one broken, honest man over a churchyard of the comfortable any day that God made, and they might all put that in their tea. Then she walked away shaking, and did not know that Tristram, come down to the church to find her, had stood at the yew and heard the whole of it, and had heard a woman defend him to a jeering crowd exactly as she must once have longed to defend her father and never been let, and had felt a thing in his chest give way. That night the Bow Street man came back. He had run Vosper to ground in a Plymouth boarding house and taken him. And in the same hour at the great door of Wolverna Court, a second carriage stopped, and Denzil Carew stepped down, and with him a hired physician and a lawyer of his own. "Come," they announced, "to examine His Grace the Duke of Wolverton as to the soundness of his mind." They received them in the great cold library. For Tristram would not be examined in a small room like a patient. Carew was all sorrow. It grieved him more than he could say, he told them, but the county talked, and a duke who saw murderers in old leather, who had shut out the world for 10 years, who now kept a ruined tradesman's daughter beneath his roof and rode the moor at dawn like a man possessed. Such a duke owed it to his name and his blood to be looked at kindly by a man of medicine. The physician, a soft, damp person with a bought face, murmured of melancholia and fixed delusion and the sad work of grief upon a solitary mind, and produced long words as a conjurer produces coins, one after another, each meant to make a sane man sound a little madder than the last. The lawyer laid papers upon the table, a commission of lunacy wanting only a signature and a finding, and then the management of all Wolverny would pass, for His Grace's own comfort and protection, into the steady hands of his nearest kin. "Sign nothing, cousin," Carew said gently, and the gentleness was the worst of it. "Only let the good doctor find as he must, and rest, and let me carry it all. And the young woman must go, of course. You see that? It is the woman, above everything, that has the valley talking. Let her go back wherever she came from, and this whole sad business can be quietly done, within the family, with no more noise." Loveday stood at the wall and felt the old cold close over her, the coroner's court cold, the certainty of her betters, the ease with which they folded an honest life into ruin. It was happening again. It was happening in front of her, to him, and every instrument of it was polished and legal and smiling. Tristram let it all be said. He let Carew finish, and the doctor finish, and the lawyer square his papers, and then he sat back and said, in the low voice that never hurried, "Are you quite done? Good. Then it is my turn, and you had best sit for it, Denzil." He did not raise his voice once. That was the thing she never forgot. He laid a decade of patient ruin upon a smiling man without once lifting his voice above the fire. He laid it out the way a man lays down a hand of cards he has held all night, one after another, face up. His own lawyer, sent for days since, was already in the house, and came in now with a strong box of 10 years' quiet work. The debts, named to the shilling, more than a great man could pay and live. The estate money bled sideways in the very seasons Carew had assisted, traced and copied and sworn before witnesses, a river of it running always toward the same sinking pocket. And Roland's last letter, in Roland's own hand, that he had caught his cousin thieving and meant to break him for it, dated 11 days before the Ashcot wall. "There is the motive," Tristram said. "Here is the method." At his nod, Loveday laid the 2 girths on the table before the physician's damp face, the old and the new, and told the room in plain words what any honest saddler could see. The twin cuts the same blade, the same left-handed draw, 10 years apart, by the same hand. The doctor looked at the 2 straps, and looked at the door, and said nothing at all, his long borrowed words gone dry in his mouth. It is one thing to speak of a lonely man's delusions for a fee. It is another to be shown, in cold lamplight, the twin knife cuts of a real murder, and to understand of a sudden which side of a hanging one has been paid to stand upon. "And here," said Tristram, "is the hand itself." The door opened, and the Bow Street man brought in Vosper. The horsemaster was grey and shrunken, a man who had spent a fortnight in a cell learning that he was to hang alone while a gentleman walked free, and who had made, that morning, the only bargain left to him. He would not look at Care. He told it to the floor, but he told it whole, that Mr. Carew had paid him 10 years gone to draw a knife across the young duke's girth, and had paid him again this autumn to do the same to the grey, and that he, Vosper, had stood by and let an innocent saddler take the first blame, because it was that or the rope, and a man is a coward before he's anything else. King's evidence, the lawyer named it. Vosper, in a whisper, named it the truest thing he had done in the whole of his life. No one in the library moved. The fire spat. The great clock in the corner went on counting, indifferent, and every soul in that cold room understood that they had just heard a murder confessed at second hand in a groom's shaking whisper, a decade too late for the man it had killed, and only barely in time for the man it had framed. The soft face of Denzel Carew had come apart while he listened. The bought physician had risen and was gathering his coat, wanting suddenly to be a great many miles from that library and its two straps and its shaking witness. And Carew, feeling the ground go out from under a whole comfortable lifetime, did the thing that cornered men do. He let the mask fall, and what was under it was very cold and very old. "He was going to ruin me," he said, and the pleasant voice had gone flat and ugly. "Roland, over a little borrowing, he would have put me in the gutter. Me, his own blood, for a few £1,000 he would never once have missed. So I removed him. And you?" He looked at Tristram with something close to hatred. "You did the rest of my work for me. You crawled into this house and rotted for 10 years, and I had only to wait, a childless madman drinking himself toward a grave, and it would all fall to me clean, and no one the wiser." His lip curled. "And then you got yourself a horse. And you began to ride, and you brought that creature in with her hands and her eyes, and I saw it plain enough. I saw you wanting to live again, wanting an heir, and I was not going to stand and wait another 20 years to be robbed of what is mine and always should have been." The confession hung in the cold air, heard by the lawyer, the runner, the steward at the door, the shrunken murderer, and the woman at the wall. But Carew was gentry to the bone, and even undone he found the old whip and cracked it. "You have a runaway groom, saving his neck," he said, straightening his coat with hands that shook only a little. "And a book of a lawyer's guesses, and a tradesman's spinster with a grudge as long as her arm, and a comfortable place in your house to keep. No bench in England hangs a gentleman upon that. Take it to the sessions if you dare, cousin. I will be tried by men of my own kind, and they will look at her, and they will look at me, and they will know at a single glance which of us to believe. You have proved a great deal in this room tonight, and you will prove not one word of it where it counts. He let them take him, because he had to." But he went out of the library smiling again, for he did not believe, not for one moment, that the word of Loveday Trowan would ever be let to weigh against the word of Denzel Carew. And the terrible thing, the thing that turned her cold to the marrow where she stood against the wall, was that he might well be right. She had lived the whole of her life on the wrong side of exactly that arithmetic. She knew to the farthing how it reckoned and how it always came out. She found him in the study near midnight, and the fear came out of her before she had decided to let it. "He is right," she said. "That is the worst of it. He is right, and he knows it, and so do you. A tradesman's spinster kept on in your house. My word is the whole of your case against him, and my word is worth nothing. At a sessions, less than nothing. They will look at me and see exactly what Carew means them to see, and they will let a murderer walk out into the sun, and my father will be a careless butcher of good men for another 100 years. Her voice broke. "I have spent my whole life learning how little the truth of a saddler's girl weighs against the lie of a gentleman. And now it cost your brother his justice, and my father his name a second time, all because of what I am Loveday. But the deeper thing had come loose, and she could not stop it. And when it is done," she said, "however it falls, what am I then? You wanted hands that could read the leather, and you found them. You wanted one soul who hungered for the truth as you did, and there I was, made to your order. I have been useful. I know my own worth to the farthing. I have always had to. But do not let me stand in this room and take being useful for being wanted, for I made that mistake once, in a coroner's court at 15. believing that if I were only right enough, only good enough, they would let me matter to them. They did not. So say it plainly, and I will bear it. When the leather has done its work, do you send it back to Taunton?" For a moment he did not move. Then he crossed the room and took her hands, both of them, the stained, clever hands that had read the truth off a strap across a whole crowd, and he held them in his good hand and his ruined one, and did not let go. "You have made one error in your reckoning, Sadler," he said low, "and it is a grievous one, so attend to me." Vosper cut the strap. My lawyer traced the money. Any pair of eyes with a week's teaching could be shown a knife cut in old leather. If all I wanted was my case, I could have hired it in an afternoon and never thought of you again. I did not want a pair of hands, Loveday. I have had a house full of hands all these long years, and I let every one of them starve of me, because not one of them ever once made me want to be in the room. He drew her fingers up against his chest over the hard beat of his heart. I have wanted one thing in 10 years, and it was not proof, and it was not vengeance, and it was not an heir to spite my cousin. It was to wake in the morning and find that I minded being alive. You did that. You walked into a fair and told 500 people the truth, and you gave me back my horse and my mornings and my own name out of your own mouth, and I have not sent one thing back to Taunton in my heart, since the hour you said that you would come. She stood with her ruined-handed Duke, holding her stained Sadler's hands against his heart, and she could not speak, because no one, in all her hard life, had ever once told her that she was wanted for herself and not for her use, and she found she did not know how to stand up under the weight of it. "So here is the plain thing you asked for," Tristram said. "Marry me, not to be kind, and not for the leather. Marry me, because a duchess is no tradesman's spinster, and the word of the Duchess of Wolvern cannot be sneered off a bench by any gentleman living. When you stand at that sessions and tell them what your two hands have seen, Denzil Carew's whole defense turns to ash in his mouth, for the woman he means to laugh at will be my wife, and they're better, and he will hang exactly as he has earned, and your father will be an honest man in the county's own book before the week is out." He drew a breath. "That is the reason I will give to the world. Here is the reason I give to you. I do not want to do the rest of it without you. Any of it ever. Stay, Loveday. Marry me, and stay." She looked up at the hard, scarred face that had cracked open like a boy's the morning he rode whole again, and she thought of the shilling and fourpence, and the clean, bright lines she had sworn to remember, and her father alone by his dead fire. And she found that for the first time in 10 years, the accounting came out on the side of hope. "You understand," she said when she could, "that I will audit every buckle in this house until the day I die. I am counting upon it." "Then yes," said Loveday Trowan. "God help you. Yes." They were married 4 days later in the small moor church where his brother lay, with the wind coming under the door and Pasco weeping without shame into a folded cloth, and the old horseman from the fair, come at the Duke's own asking, standing witness with his hat held against his chest. She did not wear white. She wore deep green, the color of the country that had taken her family, and then, at the very last, given her everything back, and at her wrist, where a bride might wear lace, she wore a plain band of her own stitching, for she was a Sadler still. When the vicar closed the book, Tristram did not give her a careful churchyard kiss. He took her face in his good hand and his ruined one both, the hand she had made whole again, and kissed her the way a man kisses the one thing he has wanted for 10 years. And the cold little church was warmer than it had been since the day a duke was carried out of it in a box. Pasco, at the back, wept as though his old heart would break, and the vicar pretended not to see, and the wind came under the door and troubled the candles and could not put them out. It was nothing like the weddings the valley made. It was better, Loveday thought, than anything the valley had ever managed, because there was not one soul in it who did not mean every word. And when they came out after, into the raw, bright morning, married the moor ran on forever green and gray to the very edge of the sky, and it belonged, all of it, as much to the saddler's daughter now as to any duke that ever lived. And she stood a moment in the wind and let herself believe it. 3 days after that the quarter sessions opened at the county town, and the Duchess of Woolvern put on her plain green and went to hang a gentleman. The county town had not seen such a crowd at a sessions in living memory. They had come for a duke and a duchess and a murder, and they packed the paneled hall to its grimy windows and stood along the walls 3 deep, the valley's finest and the good seats and the rest wherever they could push, and the low roar of them was the roar of the fair, again the same hunger for a spectacle. Only this time Loveday walked into the middle of it in deep green, with a duke at her side, and the roar dropped to a hiss of whispering as she passed. Denzil Carew sat at his ease among gentlemen he had dined with all his life. He had dressed with care, and he nodded to the bench like a man among friends because he was. She saw the arithmetic in every comfortable face turned toward him. He was one of them, and she was a saddler's byblow in a borrowed title. And he had staked his whole life on that sum, and it had never once failed him. It went hard at the first. The gentlemen on the bench were slow and cold, and Carew's counsel was smooth as butter, and when the Duke's lawyer laid out the debts and the missing money, the hall stirred with the restless distaste of men who did not care to hear that one of their own had been a thief. Money was one thing. When Vosper was brought up, grey and shaking, to give his king's evidence, Carew's counsel fell on him like a terrier on a rat. A hanged man's lie, he called it, sneering. A runaway groom saying whatever the great Duke of Woolvern had put into his mouth to save his own worthless neck. He asked Vosper silkily whether it was not true that his grace had promised him his life for this pretty tale, and Vosper, wretched and honest at the last, said that it was true his grace had, and the hall gave a low satisfied murmur as though a thing had been settled, and the bench nodded, some of them, and the comfortable faces settled, and Loveday felt the case sliding out from under them, felt the old cold horror rising in her throat that the truth would not be enough, that it was never ever enough for people like her against people like him. Then they called the Duchess of Woolvern. She took the 2 girths up with her, the old and the new, and she did not walk to the front of that hall as a supplicant walks. She had thought the night before that she would be afraid, and she found that she was not. She walked up as a master walks toward poor apprentices, because on this one thing in all the wide world there was not a man in that room her equal, and she knew it to her bones, and she let every soul in the place see that she knew it. She read the leather for them as she had read it for the crowd at the fair, only slower now, and more terrible, because now they had to hear all of it. She showed them the honest wear on the flat of the old girth, where long years and a horse's sweat had softened and darkened it, the way leather ages when it is only left to age. Then she showed them the thing that was not age at all. The clean, bright line above the buckle, the greased seam laid over it to hide the shine of new-cut hide, the single confident draw of a sharp blade. She set the new strap down beside it, and showed them the twin, stroke for stroke, 10 years apart. She told them, in a voice that did not shake, that leather does not part so of its own accord, not ever, not in a wet field nor a dry one, that her father had sworn it for 2 years to any who would hear and been laughed into an early grave for the single sin of being right. Carew's counsel rose to ask, with a thin smile, whether the witness expected the bench to take a matter of a gentleman's life upon the say-so of a harness-mender. Loveday looked at him until the smile grew uncertain. She said that she expected the bench to take it upon the leather, which could be handed round and looked at by any man there with eyes in his head, and which did not care in the smallest degree whether the hand that read it belonged to a harness-mender or a king. She had been made to look at this very cut at 15 years old, she told them, and she had not stopped being certain of it for one single day of the 10 hard years since. And then she told them the last thing, the small thing, the thing that turned the hall. The draw runs from the flesh side toward the body of the man who held the knife, she said. "It is a left-handed cut. Both of them are. 10 years apart, and by one left hand." She lifted her eyes for the first time to Denzel Carew, and every eye in that packed hall went with hers, and found him sitting with his teacup halfway to his mouth, held, as it had been held at every dinner of his gentleman's life, in his left hand. He set it down, but he set it down a heartbeat too late, and the whole county had seen him do it, and a sound went through that hall, low and wondering and turning. The very sound the crowd had made at the fair over a splendid horse, only turned now, turned entirely, and aimed at him. Carew's counsel did not rise again for a long moment. When he did, it was to try, in a voice gone thin, to have the leather set aside as the fancy of a partial witness, a wife testifying for her own husband's cause. But the two girths lay upon the table now, where any man might take them up, and several of the bench did take them up, and turned them to the gray window light, and found the clean, bright line with their own gentleman's fingers, and set them down again without one word. The leather did not care whose wife she was, it only told the truth, and went on telling it, in a language that wanted no rank at all to read. After that, it came apart for him quickly, the way a rotten strap comes apart once the first fiber goes. The Duke's lawyer rose and told the bench, upon the sworn word of himself, of the steward Pascoe, and of the officer sent down from Bow Street, exactly what Denzel Carew had said in the library at Wolvern Court, on the night his mask came down. He was going to ruin me, so I removed him. 3 men of standing, one of them a Duke's own man of law, swearing on their honor to a confession they had heard from Carew's own mouth. And there beside it lay Roland's letter, in the dead Duke's own steady hand, dated 11 days before he died, naming the thief in his own household. And there was Vosper's evidence, no longer the lie of a lone frightened groom, but the exact and dreadful fit to all the rest of it, a key turning at long last in a lock that had been shut 10 years. Denzel Carew came to his feet. He tried the old whip one final time that they could not take the word of a runaway servant and a tradesman's girl over the word of a gentleman of his blood and his acquaintance, and for the first time in the whole of his charmed and comfortable life he heard, in the silence that answered him, that the arithmetic had changed under his feet. The comfortable faces were not turned toward him now. They were turned away. Every one. The way faces turn from a thing that has begun to smell. A man is one of them only so long as they choose to go on knowing him, and they had, in the space of a single gray afternoon, and on the plain evidence of a woman's 2 hands, chosen not to know him any longer. The bench found that there was a true bill of willful murder against Denzel Carew for the death of Roland, Duke of Wolverney, and committed him to be tried at the assizes for his life. And they found, further upon the evidence of the Duchess and the 2 girths and the dead man's own letter, that Ambrose Trewin, saddler of Ottersley, had been an innocent man, that the failure of the first girth had been no fault of his hand or his craft, but the deliberate act of another, and they ordered it set down upon the record. In the county's own book, that his name was clear. It was a small thing, perhaps, 1 line in a clerk's hand, come too late for the man himself. But Loveday had carried a broken strap through 10 years of the world's certainty, for the sake of exactly that line, and when the clerk dipped his pen and wrote it down, she felt a weight she had braced against the whole of her life set itself, at long last, quietly down. Loveday heard it standing very straight in her plain green gown, and she did not weep, because a Trewin did not weep before these people and never would. But Tristram beside her felt the small hard hand find his ruined one and grip it until the bones ached, and he gripped it back and let her break his fingers all over again. Gladly, there in the front of the staring hall. They had all come once to a fair, the whole laughing county of them, to admire a splendid man upon a splendid horse, and not one of them had seen the blade beneath the buckle. She had been the only one who saw. And now at the last, in the open, before the very people who had laughed her father into his grave, every soul in that hall saw it too, and saw whose left hand had held it. And it was done, and it could never be undone again. Spring came late to the high moor that year, and then it came all at once, the frost letting go of the land in a single green week, and Woolvern Court threw open its shutters to it, window by window, room by room, until the house that had sat blind for 10 years stood at last with its whole face to the light. Denzil Carew was tried at the assizes in the spring and hanged in the summer, and the county that had dined with him all his life discovered, as counties will, that it had always privately thought there was something not quite right about the man. Vosper, who had turned king's evidence and by it saved a duke and cleared a dead saddler, was spared the rope and transported to the far side of the world instead, which was a mercy of a rough sort, and more mercy than he had ever shown Ambrose Trowan. The mountainous Carew debts died with him. What he had bled out of the estate across the years, the lawyers clawed back where clawing was possible, and Tristram gave the most of what was recovered away, quietly and in no man's hearing, to the tenants and the charities and the small forgotten pensions that his brother Roland had loved in life. And in Ottersley, under the moor, upon the stone that a poor man's daughter had once been able to afford only the plainest of, there was cut now a second line beneath the first, at the new Duchess of Wolvernay's order and at her own expense, that Ambrose Trowan had been a master of his craft and an honest man, wrongly used by those who should have known his worth, and cleared at the very last before all the county by the finding of the law. Loveday stood before it a long while on the day the mason finished. She thought of the winter her father built the great saddle, and of his 2 hands, and of the way he had made her look at a cut strap and swear to remember it, as though he had known somehow that his girl would need one day to carry the truth further than he had been let to carry it himself. She said nothing at all, and Tristram stood beside her with his ruined hand folded in hers, and said nothing either, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. It was a great deal more than she had let herself hope for across 10 long years. The valley, which had been so very sure of what she was, revised itself with the shamelessness of valleys everywhere. The magistrate's wife of the carrying voice called at Woolvern Court within the month, all smiles and warm remembrance, and was received by the Duchess with perfect courtesy, and not once asked to stay. The invitations came now in a flood, stiff and gilt-edged and eager, and Loveday answered such of them as it pleased her to answer, and let the rest lie unopened in the tray, for she had learned young and learned hard exactly what the good opinion of the comfortable was worth. And she was not minded to buy back at a dear price a thing she had already lived a whole life without. Once, at a county assembly, she let herself be persuaded to attend. The very magistrate's wife of the carrying voice pressed her hand and said warmly that she had always known there was something fine in the Trowan girl. Loveday thanked her, and said she was glad to hear it, for her father had said the very same, and had died waiting for the county to agree with him. Then she moved on, and left the woman standing, and did not trouble to look back and watch the color climb her face. Mostly, though, there were the mornings. The old horseman from the fair, who had stood witness at her wedding, was given the run of the Woolvern stables and a warm, dry room over them for as long as he should want it, for the Duke did not forget the man who had bent his grey head over a billet and refused to laugh when the laughing would have been easier. Pascoe unbent by a further half-inch each season, until by summer he was very nearly warm, which, from Pascoe, was a kind of blaze, and he rode out on the grey at first light. Still, every day the weather allowed it, and every day she looked over his saddle before he went, her hands moving along the billets and the buckles and the plain dark cuff of her own making, that let a ruined hand hold the rein, and only when she had stepped back and said the one word, "sound," did he swing up and go. It had become a kind of vow between them. That word, said at the paddock rail, morning on morning, worth more than all the words the vicar had read over them in the cold little church. He would ride out whole across the greening moor, low and easy in the saddle, a man the county had once buried and been wrong about, and she would watch him grow small against the hills and then turn back to her bench in her good north light and the work of her own 2 hands, which she never once set down, Duchess or no Duchess, and it was the seeing in her fingers that had saved his life and cleared her father, and made her in the end the whole of everything she was. There would be children in time. She did not know it yet. That first green spring, standing at the paddock rail with her hands still smelling of wax and leather. But the house that had shut itself around one man's grief for 10 years would ring before long with the noise of the living, and the shutters would stay open to it. And the great saddle her father built would hang one day in a boy's room as the finest thing in it. For now there was only the morning, and the man growing small and whole against the hills, and the work waiting at her bench, and it was enough. It was a whole world, and it was everything she had once been so certain she would never be let to have. Some cruelties come dressed as something splendid, so the whole world stands and admires while the blade does its quiet work. Loveday Trewin had learned, at 15 and again at 25, that a blade can always be seen, if only one soul in the whole admiring crowd will keep her eyes open and her mouth unafraid. She had been that one soul twice in a single life, and it had cost her very nearly everything, and it had bought her, at the very last, a living fire, and a whole man, and a house standing wide open to the light. The man who had come down off the horse to hear her was hers now, and the mornings were theirs, and the leather, God willing, would hold for a long, long time.